Hello everyone. So today we are going to revise audit documentation, which is SA 230. SA 230 mainly deals with the responsibility of the auditor to prepare audit documentation for the audit of financial statements. Now, for audit of financial statements, audit documentation is prepared, and this particular essay will talk about what exactly are the auditor's responsibility about audit documentation. In this chapter 6, the entire chapter 6 is about essay 230, which makes this particular essay quite important. In this chapter, audit documentation is covered as well as audit file is covered, which is also another important topic of ICAI. Firstly, starting with what exactly is the meaning of audit documentation. Now, audit documentation would refer to the record of three things, that is, audit procedures, audit evidence, and conclusions. So, the audit documentation refers to the record of audit procedures performed, the relevant audit evidence which is obtained, and the conclusions which are drawn from this by the auditor. So, three things, that is, a record of the audit procedures performed, the audit evidence which are obtained, and conclusions of the conclusions that the auditor has reached. Now we come on to the objectives of the auditor as per this essay. So there are two basic objectives, but these are very important and could be asked. That is, firstly, they have to maintain a record. This particular record needs to be a sufficient and appropriate record. Here the word is sufficient and appropriate record and not evidence. So the auditor has to obtain a sufficient and appropriate record of the basis of auditor's report. So whatever opinion that he is formulating, the basis for that auditor's report that he is having will be provided in this audit documentation. So he has to keep a sufficient and appropriate record of what basis are there for the auditor's report. Now, second is that he has to obtain an evidence that audit was planned and performed accordance with the essays and the legal and regulatory requirements. So, to sum it up, he has to prepare audit documentation which provides two things, that is, sufficient and appropriate record of the basis of auditor's report, and secondly, the evidence that the auditor was planned and performed firstly as per the essays and as per the legal and regulatory requirements. Now, the nature of audit documentation. The nature of audit documentation is also similar to what exactly the objectives are. That is, firstly, obtaining the evidence about the basis for auditor's report first, and second is obtaining the evidence that the audit was planned and performed as per essays and legal and regulatory requirements. Now let us move on to the purpose of audit documentation. This particular portion could be a very important question which could be extracted. Now the purpose of audit documentation is quite basic, as it all makes much sense that why exactly audit documentation would be done. So firstly, that is, the first 2 points are regarding the engagement team, assisting the engagement team. So now the first point is that it helps in assisting the engagement team to plan and perform the audit. So now why are we exactly documenting? So that we can plan the audit on this documentation and perform the audit. So the first assistance to the engagement team is that planning and performing the audit. The second assistance to the engagement team is that it helps to direct and supervise the audit and also discharge their review responsibilities. So now the engagement team, the main engagement member, he has the responsibility to direct, supervise, and review the work. So audit documentation helps in direction and supervision and also discharging the review responsibilities. The first 2 points are regarding assistance to the management in this particular topic of purpose of audit documentation. Now coming on to the third point, which is that the engagement team can be held accountable for its work. So the purpose of audit documentation is to enable the engagement team be accountable for the work. This is also related to the engagement team only. So these 3 points can be remembered together. Now the fourth point is the most important, which states that it helps in retaining the record of matters which are of continuing importance to the future evidence. This particularly means that it will help in recording those matters which will also be of importance when future audits are conducted. That is, it is of continuing significance to future audits. Now, the fifth point is enabling the conduct of quality control reviews and inspections as per SQC 1. So this part, the fifth and sixth point are mainly about inspections and quality control. The fifth point states that it enables the quality control reviews and inspections as per the SQC 1, which we have studied in chapter 11. And the sixth point states that it helps in the conduct of external inspections which are required as per the legal or other regulations. So, summarizing the purpose, the first three are related to engagement team. Assisting the engagement team to plan and perform the audit. Secondly, assisting the engagement members to direct and supervise the audit and also discharge their review responsibilities. And thirdly, enabling them to be accountable for their work. Fourth is that it helps to record the matters which are of continuing importance to the future audit. Then the fifth and sixth point are regarding quality control and inspection. That is, firstly, quality control and reviews inspections as per SQC 1, and secondly, quality control and external inspections as per the legal and regulatory or any other requirements. Now, moving on to the form, content and extent of audit documentation. Now, in this particular part, firstly, we have certain general guidelines with regard to form, content and extent of audit documentation. And next part, we have certain factors which affect the form, content and extent of audit documentation. So firstly, let's study the general guidelines, which also has certain questions framed from them. The first thing is that the auditor will prepare audit documentation which is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor who has no previous connection with the audit to understand three things: the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures performed, the results of audit procedures performed and audit evidence obtained, the significant matters arising during the audit, conclusions reached, and significant professional judgments made in reaching those conclusions. So what this first point suggests is that he will prepare such an audit documentation, the auditor will prepare such an audit documentation so that it is sufficient for who? For an experienced auditor who has no connection with the audit in order to understand the following things. Now here we have to provide certain audit documentation so that कोई भी experienced or any experienced auditor who does not know anything about the audit will be able to understand three things. The first one being the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures performed. That is the very basic thing, right? Then secondly, moving on, after audit procedures, what exactly are the results and audit evidence obtained? And thirdly, we have to give should help the auditor understand significant matters which were there during the audit and what were the conclusions which were reached, and the matters which required significant professional judgment that were required in reaching those conclusions. Now, the second point covers that when we are recording the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures performed, which we just discussed in the previous point, when we are particularly documenting the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures, we have to record, or the auditor has to record, the characteristics of specific matters or the items tested during the audit procedures. Like they have to find out what are the identifying characteristics of certain specific matters or items which are tested during the audit procedures. For example, if we are performing audit procedures or inventory, so what are the identifying characteristics of the inventory? That is, we are checking the physical condition, or what exactly are we checking? So those characteristics have to be recorded, which we are testing with the audit procedures. Then in recording the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures, we have to record who performed the audit work and the date the such work was completed. That is, who and when. Then thirdly, we have to also record that who reviewed this particular audit work performed and the date and extent of such review. Now, the auditor shall document Thirdly, the auditor shall document the discussions on significant matters with the management or TCWG or any others, including the nature of these significant matters. And he also has to include with who and when this particular discussion took place. So, what does he have to include in documentation? He has to include important discussions on significant matters, the nature of these significant matters, and when and with whom this discussion took place. Now, fourth point is very important. It states that if the auditor has identified any information which is not consistent with the final conclusion that he has drawn, then he shall also document that how exactly did he address that particular inconsistency. Now, lastly, the factors which affect the form, content, and extent of audit documentation. This also forms a particular question in the ICAI study material, as well as it is asked quite frequently. Now, what are the factors which are going to affect the form, content, and extent of audit documentation? So, firstly, if we go by logical order, firstly, it will be the size and complexity of the entity. How much big or what nature it has, the size and complexity of the entity, first point. Secondly would be the identified risk of material misstatements. So if the risk is more, then the form and content will be different, or the extent of audit documentation probably will be more. Then the nature of audit procedures to be performed. That is, what exact audit procedures were performed as a response to the identified risk of material misstatements. Certain audit procedures will be performed. So, what nature of the audit procedures were performed is also a very important contributing factor. Then next is audit methodology and tools which are used. So audit methodology will depend upon what exactly audit procedures are to be performed. So it does make a sense here. Next is the significance of the audit evidence received. So how important is the audit evidence received will also determine the form, content, and extent of audit documentation. Next is the nature and extent of the exceptions which are identified. So if there are certain exceptions which are identified, that will also decide this form, content, and extent of audit documentation. Lastly, the need to document a discussion. That is, what exactly is the objective. So the form, content, and extent will also depend on that. So if we make a logical sense out of it, firstly, the size and complexity of the entity. Second, identified risk of material misstatement. Thirdly, the nature and extent of audit procedures performed. Fourth, audit methodology which is used. Then next is the significance of the audit evidence obtained. Next, the nature and extent of exceptions which are identified. And lastly, the need to document the conclusion. Now we have examples of audit documentation. Now, audit documentation, certain points are mentioned here. That is, audit documentation may be recorded on paper or electronic media. It can be any particular media. Now, an important point is that audit documentation is not a substitute for the entity's accounting records. Next is that it also forms an important question, that is, what exactly need not form a part of the audit documentation. So now, what exactly might not be a part of audit documentation includes superseded drafts of working papers and financial statements. Then the notes which reflect incomplete or preliminary thinking. Thirdly, any duplicates for the documents. Fourth, previous copies of documents which are corrected for typos or errors. So these are certain documents which might not form a part of the audit documentation. That is, superseded documents, then notes which include preliminary thinking or incomplete thinking, then duplicates, and lastly, previous copies of documents which were corrected for any typos or any errors. Now, what exactly will be included in audit documentation? It will include audit program, issues memorandum. Issues memoranda is basically the key audit matters. Then correspondence with significant, like any significant emails, then checklists, analysis, etc. Now, lastly, the next part is that what is the importance of the timely preparation of audit documentation. So audit documentation should be sufficient and appropriate audit documentation, that is sufficient and appropriate records of audit documentation should be prepared on a timely basis. This will help in improving the quality of audit. It will help in the effective review and also the evaluation of audit evidence and conclusions before finalizing the auditor's report. Now, if the audit documentation is prepared after the audit work is done, it is likely that it is less accurate than the documentation which is prepared at the time such work is performed.